parents who had abandoned me 15 years earlier. When my wealthy grandfather died and left me everything, his entire $18.5 million estate, my estranged parents suddenly reappeared, but they didn't come to reconnect. They didn't come to mourn. They came to drag me into court. They told everyone I had manipulated him. They called me a liar, a fraud, and in front of reporters, colleagues, and dozens of strangers, my own mother looked at me with the same disgust someone might show dirt on the bottom of their shoe. Then something unexpected happened. The judge paused. He studied the case file in front of him, then slowly looked up at me. "Wait," he said. "You're the defendant?" The courtroom fell silent, because in that moment, the judge realized something that no one else in that room knew yet. And what happened next changed everything. My name is Marina Schultz. I'm a 32-year-old attorney, and to understand how I ended up standing in that courtroom, accused by my own parents of stealing from my dying grandfather, we need to go back to where this story really began. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel. Your support really motivates me to keep sharing stories like this. Now let me take you back to where this story began. It was my birthday. I spent the entire morning decorating the dining room myself, balloons, streamers, even a handmade banner taped unevenly across the wall. My mother walked past me 3 separate times without saying a single word. My father stayed in his office on the phone, discussing a real estate deal. My older brother Daniel was the center of attention that night. My parents were hosting an elegant dinner to celebrate his college acceptance. Important guests, networking opportunities, everything revolved around him. No one remembered my birthday. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table with a store-bought cupcake. That was when my grandfather walked through the door. He stopped the moment he saw me, the decorations I'd hung by myself, the lonely cupcake, the empty room. His expression fell instantly. "Marina," he asked gently as he sat down beside me, "where is everyone?" "They're at Daniel's dinner," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's okay. His celebration is more important." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." My grandfather stayed with me that entire evening. We ordered pizza, watched old movies, and he told me stories about how he built his business from nothing. Before he left that night, he looked directly into my eyes and said something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. "Marina, you are worth more than they will ever see. Don't let them define you." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But as the years passed, that pattern never changed. Every achievement I earned, honor roll, debate team captain, a full scholarship to college, was met with silence from my parents. Meanwhile, Daniel received applause for accomplishments that barely required effort. When I turned 17, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I packed a bag, withdrew the small savings I had, and left home. I worked my way through college and law school on my own, juggling 3 jobs at a time. I never asked my parents for money, not once. But I never stopped visiting my grandfather. He was the only person who truly saw me. 7 years later, I graduated from the University of Chicago Law School, finishing in the top 10% of my class. I still sent my parents an invitation to the ceremony. I shouldn't have expected anything. And yet a small part of me hoped, maybe this time would be different. Maybe they would finally see that I had built something real without their money and without their approval. The ceremony was beautiful. Families filled the auditorium, cheering and crying as their children crossed the stage. When they called my name, I walked across the platform alone. Still, I scanned the crowd, hoping to recognize a familiar face. My grandfather was there in the front row, smiling with unmistakable pride. He was the only one. 2 days later, I received a message from my mother. Not congratulations, not even acknowledgement. Just 4 words. "We don't celebrate mediocrity." That was all I meant to her. I showed the text to my grandfather during one of our weekly lunches. He read it slowly, then placed the phone down and shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I thought I raised my son better than that." "It's not your fault," I told him. "Maybe not," he replied. But I see what they refuse to see. You built your life yourself, Marina. That's real success. Over the next several years, I built a career at Kirkland & Ellis LLP, one of Chicago's top law firms. I worked on major cases, won trials, and gradually earned the respect of partners twice my age. My grandfather was there for every milestone, my first courtroom victory, my promotion to senior associate, even quiet dinners on random Tuesday nights. My parents called exactly twice in 5 years. Both times they wanted money for Daniel's failing startup. Both times I refused. And both times my grandfather noticed. He noticed everything. Looking back now, I think that's when he made his decision. My grandfather, Edward Schultz, passed away early on a Tuesday morning in March. He was 85. I was there with him. For 2 weeks before that day, ever since his heart began failing, I stayed by his side. I held his hand, read his favorite books aloud, and told him about the cases I was working on. Even when he could no longer speak, he still smiled when he heard my voice. My parents visited once. They stayed for 20 minutes. Most of that time was spent scrolling through their phones. They left without even saying goodbye. My grandfather died peacefully in his sleep with me sitting beside him. 1 week later, his attorney, Charles Bennett, scheduled a meeting to read the will. I assumed it would be routine. Yes, my grandfather was wealthy, but I believed he would divide everything between my father and me, maybe place some assets in a trust. I was wrong. Charles sat across from us in his office. My parents were on one side of the table. I sat on the other. He opened a folder and began reading aloud. To my granddaughter, Marina Schultz, the only person in this family who loved me for who I am, not for what I own. He paused briefly before finishing the sentence. I leave the entirety of my estate. The room fell completely silent. Charles Bennett continued reading in an even professional tone. This includes all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $18.5 million. My mother's face drained of color. My father leaned forward in his chair, his jaw clenched tight. There must be some mistake, my father said. There isn't, Charles replied calmly. Mr. Schultz was very clear. He drafted this will a year ago while fully competent. He also left specific written instructions. Charles slid a sheet of paper across the table. At the bottom, written in my grandfather's own handwriting, was a single line. They were never there when I needed them. Marina was. 2 days later, my parents appeared at my door for the first time in 15 years. They didn't knock politely. They rang the doorbell 3 times in rapid succession, the same impatient rhythm I remembered from childhood, like the house already belonged to them. When I opened the door, my mother pushed past me without saying a word. My father walked in behind her, wearing that familiar expression, the one that always meant he was about to tell me how things were going to be. We need to talk, my father said, standing in the middle of my living room as if he owned it. About what? I asked, even though I already knew. The will, my mother said sharply as she turned toward me. About the ridiculous situation your grandfather created. I closed the door slowly behind them. The will is legal, I said. It's already settled. It's not settled, my father replied. That money belongs to the family. You have no right to keep all of it. A strange calm settled in my chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt. Just a quiet, tired clarity. I have every right, I said. Grandfather chose to leave it to me. He was 85 years old, my mother snapped. He wasn't thinking clearly. You manipulated him. I visited him every week for 15 years, I replied evenly. Where were you? My father stepped closer, his voice low. Watch your tone. We are still your parents. Are you? The words escaped before I could stop them. Because parents don't abandon their children. Parents don't disappear for 15 years and then show up demanding money. We're not demanding anything, my mother said, though her voice suggested otherwise. We're asking you to do the right thing. Share it. That's what family does. I looked at both of them. The same people who had spent my childhood making me feel invisible. The same people who had celebrated Daniel's every mediocre achievement while ignoring everything I accomplished. The will is legal, I repeated calmly. If you disagree, take it to court. My father's eyes narrowed. Oh, we will, he said. And when we do, everyone will see exactly what kind of person you really are. 1 week later, a process server knocked on my office door. I was reviewing depositions for a corporate case when he handed me a thick envelope. The moment I saw the law firm's name printed across the letterhead, I knew what it was. My parents were suing me. The complaint was 30 pages long. They accused me of undue influence, elder manipulation, and fraudulent misrepresentation. According to their filing, my grandfather had been mentally incompetent when he signed the will. They demanded the court invalidate the entire document and redistribute the estate under intestate succession laws, which would give my father nearly everything. I sat there staring at the pages, my hands slowly going numb. A knock came from my office door. Olivia Grant, a colleague from my firm, stepped inside. "You okay?" she asked. "You look pale." Without saying a word, I handed her the complaint. She read the first page, then looked up at me with wide eyes. "Marina, this is completely baseless." "I know," I said quietly. She kept flipping through the pages, her expression growing darker. "They're playing dirty," she said. "They've already taken this to the press." She pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. The headline read, "Estranged granddaughter accused of stealing family fortune." My stomach dropped. The article portrayed me as a greedy opportunist who had appeared during my grandfather's final days to steal an inheritance that supposedly belonged to my father. The comment section was even worse. People who had never met me were calling me a vulture, a thief, a manipulator. "This is character assassination," Olivia said quietly. "No," I replied. "It's strategy." I looked at the article again, feeling the realization settle in. They want to destroy my reputation before we even step into court. Olivia placed her phone on the desk. "So what are you going to do?" I looked down at the complaint again, at my parents' signatures at the bottom of the final page. Something inside me hardened. "I'm going to fight," I said. "Not just for the money, for my name." But the next day, I officially hired Olivia Grant as my attorney. For the next 2 weeks, we turned a conference room into a war room. Documents covered every surface: medical records, bank statements, correspondence, witness lists. "Your grandfather was extremely thorough," Olivia said one afternoon as she held up a thick folder. "He expected someone might challenge this." She handed me the medical records first. 3 months before drafting the will, my grandfather had undergone a complete neurological evaluation. The doctor's report was clear. Patient demonstrates full mental capacity, strong memory, and sound judgment. "That completely destroys their incompetency argument," I said. "It gets even better," Olivia replied. She opened another folder and slid a small flash drive across the table. "Your grandfather recorded a video." My breath caught. "A video?" She nodded. "He sat down with Charles Bennett a year before he died and explained on camera exactly why he was leaving everything to you." She studied me carefully. "Have you watched it yet?" I shook my head. "Do you want to?" Part of me did. Another part of me was afraid of what it might stir up, but after a moment, I nodded. Olivia opened the file on her laptop. The video began to play. My grandfather, Edward Schultz, appeared on the screen, seated in Charles Bennett's office. He looked thinner than I remembered, but his posture was upright, his eyes focused and alert. "My name is Edward Schultz," he said calmly. "I'm recording this to explain my decision." I watched every second of the video without speaking. By the time it ended, tears were running down my face. Olivia closed the laptop quietly. "This is your strongest piece of evidence," she said, "but we don't use it immediately." I wiped my eyes. "When do we show it?" "When they've fully committed to their story," she replied. "When they've convinced the court that you manipulated him. That's when we reveal the truth." I nodded slowly. Walking into that courtroom was going to be the hardest moment of my life. But I wasn't going to back down. I had the truth. And that was enough. On the morning of the trial, I stood outside Cook County Circuit Court trying to steady my breathing. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters. Cameras flashed as I walked toward the entrance. "Miss Schultz!" someone shouted. "Did you manipulate your grandfather?" I kept walking without answering. Olivia stayed beside me, her hand lightly on my arm. "Don't engage," she whispered. "Let the evidence speak." Inside, the courtroom was already full. I recognized several people from Kirkland and Ellis sitting in the gallery, colleagues I had worked with for years. Some looked supportive. Others looked curious, as if they were watching a spectacle unfold. At the plaintiff's table sat my parents beside their attorney, Thomas Caldwell. My mother wore an expensive navy suit. My father sat rigidly in his chair, his expression cold and unreadable. Neither of them looked at me. I sat down at the defense table and arranged my files, though my hands trembled slightly. "All rise." The courtroom stood as Judge Andrew Whitaker entered. I already knew he had been assigned to the case, but seeing him in person made everything suddenly real. He was in his early 60s, sharp-eyed and known for his no-nonsense rulings. Years earlier, before joining the bench, he had briefly mentored me on a complex contract dispute while he was still practicing law. He took his seat and opened the case file. Then he looked up. His gaze landed on me. For a brief second, his eyes widened, just slightly. "Miss Schultz," he said carefully, his voice neutral. "You're the defendant in this matter?" The entire courtroom went quiet. I stood. "Yes, Your Honor." He studied me for a long moment. I could see the recognition in his eyes. He remembered me. He remembered my work. And he was clearly trying to reconcile the attorney he once mentored with the person now accused of elder fraud. "I see," he said at last. "Let's proceed." Thomas Caldwell stood and adjusted his suit jacket. He had the kind of polished confidence that comes with decades in high-stakes litigation. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my clients, Victor and Bonnie Schultz, are here today because of a serious injustice." He paused deliberately. Their father, Edward Schultz, was a man of great wealth and strong judgment for most of his life. But in his final years, he became vulnerable. Yet the word hung in the air. The defendant, Marina Schultz, systematically isolated Mr. Schultz from the rest of his family. She manipulated him emotionally and psychologically, and when he was at his weakest, she convinced him to disinherit his own son in favor of herself. I felt Olivia's hand lightly press against my arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. Caldwell returned to his table and picked up a document. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A, a letter written by Mr. Schultz 6 months before his death." Copies were passed to the judge and to Olivia. I leaned over to read it. The letter was short, handwritten, uneven. "I feel pressured. I don't know what to do anymore." My stomach tightened. The handwriting resembled my grandfather's, but something about it felt wrong. The loops were off, the spacing was irregular. "This letter," Caldwell continued, "demonstrates that Mr. Schultz was under immense pressure. He was clearly being coerced." Judge Whitaker examined the paper carefully. "Do you have authentication for this document?" he asked. "We're in the process of obtaining it, Your Honor," Caldwell said smoothly, "but the emotional content speaks for itself." Before anyone else could speak, my mother suddenly stood. "Your Honor, if I may," she said, her voice trembling with carefully performed emotion. "My daughter never cared about my father. She only appeared when she realized he was dying and that there was money to inherit." A murmur spread across the courtroom. I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward me. Judge Whitaker raised a hand. "Mrs. Schultz, please sit down. You will have an opportunity to testify later." But the damage had already been done. Their narrative had been planted. Olivia stood immediately. "Your Honor, that letter is a forgery," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We have a handwriting expert ready to testify that it does not match Edward Schultz's verified writing samples." Caldwell frowned. "That's a serious accusation." "This is a serious case," Olivia replied. Then she turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff's entire argument relies on the claim that Mr. Schultz was either incompetent or under duress. But the evidence will show something very different. Olivia stepped forward and picked up a thick folder from our table. Ms. Marina Schultz visited her grandfather every single week for 15 years, she began. She was present at family gatherings, holidays, and hospital visits. Meanwhile, Mr. Victor Schultz and Mrs. Bonnie Schultz contacted Edward Schultz mostly when they needed financial assistance. Objection, Thomas Caldwell said immediately. Speculation. It's documented, Olivia replied without missing a beat. She lifted a set of printed records. These are verified phone logs showing the frequency and duration of communication between the parties. The pattern is unmistakable. Judge Andrew Whitaker motioned for the documents. I'll review those, Olivia continued, her voice steady. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have medical documentation confirming that Mr. Schultz was fully competent when he drafted his will. He even underwent a comprehensive cognitive evaluation specifically to prevent this exact type of challenge. I watched the judge carefully. He was listening closely, making notes as she spoke. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I stood. Your Honor, may I say something? Judge Whitaker looked at me. Ms. Schultz, you have legal counsel. I understand, I said. But I need to say this personally. The courtroom quieted. I visited my grandfather every week because I loved him, not because I wanted his money. I never asked him for a single dollar. My parents, on the other hand, called him twice in 5 years. Both times they were asking for money. No one spoke. The truth is in the records, Your Honor, I added quietly. Not in their accusations. Judge Whitaker studied me for several seconds before turning toward Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, do you have additional evidence beyond this disputed letter? Caldwell hesitated. We are still gathering supporting material. You filed a lawsuit without sufficient evidence? The judge asked sharply. I could feel the momentum shifting. Before I go further, thank you for listening to this story. If this moment resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated or forced to defend what's rightfully yours, consider subscribing and leaving a comment about where you're watching from. I read every message, and your stories matter more than you know. Now let's go back to that courtroom, because what happened next made the tension even worse. That's when my mother suddenly stood again. Your Honor, please, Bonnie Schultz said, her voice rising. My daughter has always been ungrateful. She abandoned this family when she was 17. She turned her back on all of us. Judge Whitaker's expression hardened. Mrs. Schultz, I've already instructed you to remain seated. But she ignored him. She turned toward me, her eyes burning with anger. You were never good enough for this family, Marina, she said loudly. You know that. You've always been a disappointment, and now you're trying to steal what was never yours. The words hit the room like a slap. Not because they hurt. I had heard versions of them my entire life, but because she said them here, in front of everyone. My colleagues, reporters, complete strangers. She wanted to humiliate me publicly. The courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward me, waiting to see if I would break. I stood slowly and faced her. I didn't abandon anyone, I said, my voice steady. I left because I was never wanted. There's a difference. My mother's face flushed bright red. You! Judge Whitaker slammed his gavel. That's enough. Mrs. Schultz, sit down immediately or I will hold you in contempt of court. My father grabbed her arm and pulled her back into her chair. She was shaking with rage. The judge looked across the courtroom. Let me make something clear, he said firmly. This is a court of law, not a family therapy session. We proceed based on evidence and legal arguments. Personal attacks have no place here. Then he glanced at me again. For just a moment, his expression softened. Ms. Schultz, you may sit. I sat down, my heart still pounding. Olivia leaned toward me and whispered, You handled that perfectly. But I could still feel my mother's hatred burning across the room. Judge Whitaker wasn't finished. He turned toward Caldwell with a look that made the attorney shift slightly in his seat. Olivia stood again. This time her posture was confident, decisive. This was the moment we had been preparing for. Your Honor, she said, we have evidence that conclusively demonstrates Mr. Edward Schultz's mental capacity and his intentions. Caldwell looked up sharply. What evidence? A video recording, Olivia replied. Recorded by Mr. Schultz 1 year before his death in the presence of his attorney, Charles Bennett. In the recording, Mr. Schultz explains his decision in his own words. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Thomas Caldwell rose slowly from his chair. Your Honor, he said, video recordings can be manipulated. Anyone with basic editing software can alter footage. We cannot simply assume this recording is authentic. Several reporters exchanged uneasy looks. Then Olivia spoke again, calm and steady. That concern was anticipated, she said, which is why Mr. Schultz also arranged independent verification. Judge Whitaker raised his hand for silence. A video recording? He asked. Yes, Your Honor, Olivia said. Mr. Schultz wanted to ensure there would be no doubt about his wishes or his state of mind. Caldwell frowned. Objection. This recording could have been manipulated. Deepfakes are... We are fully prepared to provide forensic verification, Olivia interrupted. The video contains metadata, timestamps, and was recorded in the presence of a licensed attorney who will testify to its authenticity. Judge Whitaker leaned back slightly. When was this recording made? March 15th of last year, Olivia answered, 14 months before Mr. Schultz passed away. His medical records from that same week confirm he was in excellent cognitive health. I looked at my parents. My father's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching. My mother had gone completely pale. I'll allow it, Judge Whitaker said finally, but I want full forensic verification submitted before we view it. Independent confirmation that the recording is authentic and unaltered. We can provide that within 24 hours, Your Honor, Olivia said. Then we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. The judge looked toward both sides of the courtroom. I suggest both parties take this time to consider whether this case should proceed. He was offering my parents an escape, a chance to withdraw the lawsuit before the truth destroyed their narrative, but I already knew they wouldn't take it. That evening, my phone rang. I was in my apartment reviewing documents with Olivia when I saw the name on the screen. Victor Schultz, my father. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. Olivia nodded toward the phone. Put it on speaker, I answered. Hello? Marina. My father's voice was clipped, controlled. We need to talk. We already talked in court, I said. Not there, my father replied. Privately. This has gone too far. I glanced at Olivia. What do you want? I asked. To settle this, Victor Schultz said. Your mother was emotional today. She didn't mean what she said. We can still fix this. Drop the video and we'll drop the lawsuit. We split the estate, 50-50. 50-50, I repeated. After everything? No, I said. Marina, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I replied calmly. The will is legal. Grandfather made his decision. I'm not negotiating. In the background, I heard my mother's voice. Let me talk to her. There was a brief rustling, then Bonnie Schultz came on the line, her voice sharp and icy. You're making a serious mistake, Marina. If you go through with this, we will destroy you. Everyone will know exactly what kind of person you are. They already tried that, I said. It didn't work. Her voice dropped to a hiss. We have more. Things you wouldn't want the public to hear. Olivia silently mouthed one word to me. Bluffing. If you actually have evidence, I said, bring it to court. Otherwise, stop threatening me. You ungrateful... I ended the call. My hands were shaking. Olivia placed a steady hand on my shoulder. They're panicking, she said quietly. That video terrifies them. They know it ends their case. Then why do I feel like this is only the beginning? I asked. Because it is, Olivia said. Tomorrow, when that video plays, everything changes. They know it. You know it. And they'll fight as dirty as they can until the very end. I looked down at my phone. My father's name still glowed on the screen. Let them, I said. I'm ready. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, Olivia and I sat in my living room reviewing every possible scenario. The forensic report had come back clean. The video was authentic, unaltered, properly documented. We had medical records, witness testimony, and a detailed paper trail supporting every claim we had made. "This should be straightforward," Olivia said while reviewing her notes. "That video destroys their case." "Should," I repeated. "But they'll try something. You know they will." She nodded. "They'll go after your character, try to paint you as manipulative, calculating. Be ready for that." "I've been ready my whole life," I said quietly. Olivia studied me for a moment. "Are you sure you want to be inside the courtroom when we play the video?" "You could wait outside. I can handle it." I shook my head. "No, I need to be there. I want to see their faces when they hear what grandfather really thought." She didn't argue. At 6 the next morning, I showered and dressed in my most professional suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the one I wore for closing arguments. I wanted to walk into that courtroom as the attorney I was, not the victim they were trying to turn me into. Olivia met me on the courthouse steps. The reporters were already there again, more of them this time. Word had spread about the video. "Miss Schultz, what's on the recording?" one journalist shouted. "Will you settle with your parents?" another called out. I kept walking without answering. Inside the courtroom, my parents were already seated. My mother's expression was a rigid mask. My father stared straight ahead, refusing to look at me. Judge Andrew Whitaker entered the room and everyone stood. "We are here today to review the video evidence," he said. "Ms. Grant, are you prepared to proceed?" Olivia stood. "Yes, Your Honor." I took a slow breath. This was it, the moment everything would change. "Your Honor," Olivia said, "we would like to present the recorded testimony of Edward Schultz." The courtroom was far more crowded than the day before. I recognized additional faces, partners from my firm, reporters I had seen on television, even a few former classmates from law school. People stood along the back wall. This wasn't just a probate case anymore. It had turned into a public spectacle. Judge Whitaker surveyed the room with a stern expression. "Let me remind everyone that this is a court of law," he said. "There will be no outbursts, no commentary, and absolutely no recording devices." He nodded toward the bailiff. "Ensure all devices are silenced." The bailiff walked through the gallery checking phones. At the plaintiff's table, my parents sat stiffly. My mother's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. My father kept glancing nervously at the screen that had been placed at the front of the courtroom. Everything was ready. Olivia had connected her laptop, tested the audio, and submitted the forensic authentication report. Judge Whitaker had already reviewed the verification documents that morning. "Ms. Grant," the judge said, "I have reviewed the forensic analysis. The recording appears to be authentic. You may proceed." Olivia nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." She stood and addressed the court. "For the record, this video was recorded on March 15th of last year in the office of Attorney Charles Bennett. At the time, Mr. Schultz was 84 years old, and according to his medical records, in full cognitive health." She turned toward the screen. "Your Honor, members of the court, we present the testimony of Edward Schultz, recorded in his own words." The lights dimmed slightly. The screen flickered to life. And there he was, my grandfather, sitting in a leather chair, wearing his favorite cardigan, looking straight into the camera with clear, steady eyes. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Even my mother stopped fidgeting. My grandfather's voice filled the room, clear, steady, and surprisingly strong for a man his age. "My name is Edward Schultz," he began. "I'm recording this video to explain my decision." The recording had barely started when Thomas Caldwell jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, I must object." "Sit down, Mr. Caldwell," Judge Whitaker said without looking away from the screen. "You'll have your opportunity." Caldwell sat again, though I could see his mind racing, searching for some way to counter what was about to unfold. When the video finally ended, the courtroom remained quiet for several long seconds. A few people in the gallery wiped tears from their eyes. One of my colleagues caught my gaze and gave me a small nod, something close to respect. Judge Whitaker turned toward Caldwell. "Your response, counselor?" Caldwell stood, adjusting his tie. To his credit, he still looked composed. Your Honor, while the video is certainly compelling, it does not resolve the central issue. My clients have evidence that Ms. Marina Schultz deliberately isolated her grandfather from the rest of his family. He walked back to his table and lifted a stack of printed pages. These are text messages exchanged between Ms. Schultz and Mr. Schultz. In these conversations, she repeatedly discourages him from meeting with his son. She also claims that Victor and Bonnie Schultz only care about his money. He handed copies to the judge and to Olivia. I leaned forward to read them. My stomach dropped. The messages were real, but they had been edited. Entire parts of the conversation were missing. Caldwell continued confidently. This behavior constitutes elder manipulation, Your Honor. She poisoned the relationship between father and son, then positioned herself to inherit the estate. At that moment, my mother stood up again, despite Caldwell trying to pull her back down. She convinced him we didn't love him, Bonnie Schultz cried, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. That's manipulation. That's what this video doesn't show, how she got inside his head. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some people in the gallery began nodding. I could feel the atmosphere shifting again. Judge Whitaker raised a hand. Mrs. Schultz, I have already warned you about speaking out of turn. But the damage had already been done. Doubt had entered the room. Olivia was already opening her laptop. Your Honor, those messages have been taken completely out of context, she said calmly. We have the full conversation records, and they tell a very different story. She connected her laptop to the courtroom display. The messages appeared on the screen again, but this time the entire conversation was visible. The first exchange showed my grandfather texting me. Edward, your father called again, asked for $120,000 for Daniel's company, third request this year. My reply? Me. You don't have to give it to him if you don't want to. His response? Edward. I know. But he gets angry when I say no. Says I'm being selfish. My message? Me. That's not fair to you. You've already helped them a lot. Olivia highlighted the section Caldwell had conveniently removed. Notice here, Your Honor, she said. Ms. Schultz is not telling her grandfather to avoid his son. She's encouraging him to set boundaries when he's being financially pressured. She scrolled down to another conversation. Edward. Bonnie says I'm wasting money on charity cases instead of helping family. She means the scholarship fund. Me. It's your money, your decision. You earned the right to spend it however you want. Edward. Thank you for understanding, Marina. You're the only one who doesn't make me feel guilty. Olivia turned back toward the judge. The full context clearly shows that Ms. Schultz was protecting her grandfather from financial exploitation, not isolating him from his family. I stood. Your Honor, I never told my grandfather to cut off my parents. I simply told him he had the right to say no. Those are two very different things. Judge Whitaker carefully studied both sets of messages, the edited versions Caldwell had submitted, and the complete records now displayed. Then he looked up slowly. Mr. Caldwell, he said, did you knowingly submit incomplete evidence to this court? Caldwell's face lost color. Your Honor, we received these messages from— That's not what I asked. The entire room held its breath. And then my mother snapped. She jumped to her feet so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly across the floor. This is ridiculous, she shouted. She's twisting everything. Mrs. Schultz, the judge began. No, my mother yelled, her voice echoing through the courtroom. I'm not going to sit here and listen to her lies. She doesn't deserve that money. She's nothing. She has always been nothing. The entire courtroom froze. She was a mistake, Bonnie continued, her face flushed with fury. We never wanted her. We tried to make something of her, but she threw it all away, and now she thinks she can take what belongs to this family. Mrs. Schultz, sit down immediately, Judge Whitaker said, his voice sharp as a whip. She's a liar and a manipulator, and everyone here should know it. Bailiff, the judge said. The bailiff stepped forward. My father grabbed my mother's arm, trying to pull her back into her seat, but she jerked away from him. You're all being fooled, she shouted toward the gallery. She's not the victim. We are. She stole our father from us. Mrs. Schultz, Judge Whitaker said coldly, if you do not sit down immediately, I will hold you in contempt of court and have you removed from this courtroom. My mother finally stopped shouting. She was breathing hard, her eyes wild, as if the anger had carried her somewhere she hadn't meant to go. Slowly, she looked around the courtroom and seemed to realize what she had just done. Then she sank back into her chair. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Judge Andrew Whitaker watched her for a long moment before turning to Thomas Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, he said evenly, I suggest you advise your client on proper courtroom conduct. Caldwell nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. The judge then turned toward Olivia Grant. Ms. Grant, do you have additional evidence to present? Olivia glanced at me. I gave a small nod. Yes, Your Honor, she said. We would like to call our medical expert to testify regarding Mr. Edward Schultz's cognitive capacity. But Judge Whitaker raised a hand. Before we move to expert testimony, he said, I would like to replay a portion of Mr. Schultz's video. There was a section I want the court to hear again. Olivia brought the recording back up and fast-forwarded to a specific timestamp. My grandfather appeared on the screen once more. This time he leaned slightly forward in his chair, his expression more serious. I want to address something directly, he said in the recording. I know my son and daughter-in-law may challenge this will. They may claim I was confused or manipulated. So let me be perfectly clear. He looked straight into the camera. I am 84 years old. I have all my faculties. My physician, Dr. Laura Henderson, examined me last week and confirmed that I am in sound mental health. I am making this decision knowingly and intentionally. He paused for a moment. I could see emotion flicker across his face. My son Victor has called me 4 times in the past 2 years. Each time he asked for money. My daughter-in-law Bonnie has visited twice in 5 years, and neither visit lasted more than an hour. Then his voice grew stronger. Marina visits me every week. She brings me books. She tells me about her cases. She asks how I'm doing. She has never once asked me for money. I felt tears forming in my eyes. I'm leaving everything to Marina because she's the only person in this family who loved me for who I am, not for what I own. She deserves this inheritance. She earned it through years of genuine care. He leaned back slightly. If anyone challenges this will, understand that I made this decision with a clear mind and a full heart. This is my final word. The video ended. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. I glanced toward the gallery and saw several people wiping their eyes. One woman in the back row was openly crying. Then I looked at my parents. My mother's face had gone pale. My father was staring down at the floor. Olivia stood. Your Honor, the defense would now like to call Dr. Laura Henderson to the stand. A woman in her 50s entered the courtroom. She was petite and composed, her graying hair pulled neatly into a bun. After taking the oath, she sat in the witness box. Dr. Henderson, Olivia began, what is your professional relationship with Mr. Edward Schultz? I was his primary care physician for 23 years, she replied. And did you examine Mr. Schultz in March of last year, around the time he recorded the video we just watched? Yes. At his request, I conducted a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Olivia displayed a medical report on the courtroom screen. Could you describe your findings? Dr. Henderson adjusted her glasses. Mr. Schultz demonstrated excellent cognitive function for his age. I administered the mini mental state examination, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, and several other standard diagnostic tests. He scored within the normal range on every assessment. Did you observe any signs of dementia, confusion, or diminished mental capacity? None whatsoever, she said firmly. He was sharp, articulate, and fully aware of his circumstances. Olivia nodded. Did Mr. Schultz explain why he wanted this evaluation? Yes, Dr. Henderson said. He told me he was updating his will and wanted formal documentation proving he was of sound mind. His exact words were, I don't want anyone claiming I didn't know what I was doing. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. Dr. Henderson, in your professional opinion, was Edward Schultz capable of making informed decisions regarding his estate in March of last year? Absolutely, she answered without hesitation. He knew exactly what he was doing. The judge turned toward Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, do you have any evidence that contradicts Dr. Henderson's testimony? Caldwell slowly rose to his feet. He looked at my parents, then back at the judge. No, Your Honor, he said quietly. Do you have any additional witnesses or evidence to present? No, Your Honor. Judge Whitaker leaned back in his chair. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Judge Whitaker looked at my parents for several long seconds. Then he turned toward me. I have presided over probate disputes for more than 15 years, he began. I have seen families divided by greed, by misunderstanding, and sometimes by genuine disagreement about a loved one's wishes. He picked up the medical report in front of him. But this case is different. He set the document down slowly. The evidence presented here is overwhelming, Mr. Edward Schultz was of sound mind. He made his intentions unmistakably clear, both in writing and on video. In fact, he took extraordinary steps to document his decision precisely because he anticipated it might be challenged. Judge Andrew Whitaker then turned toward my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Schultz, he said, his tone calm but firm. I understand that losing a parent is painful. Grief can cause people to react in ways they normally wouldn't. However, the evidence presented in this case is unmistakably clear. My mother's hands were trembling. Your father chose to leave his estate to Ms. Marina Schultz because she earned his trust and affection through years of consistent care, the judge continued. The will is valid, the video testimony is unequivocal, and the medical evidence is conclusive. Then he looked at me, and his expression softened slightly. Miss Schultz, I have known you as a colleague and as a professional. It is evident to both myself and this court that you earned your grandfather's trust honestly. You did not manipulate him. You cared for him. He lifted the gavel. The will of Edward Schultz stands exactly as written. The plaintiff's challenge is dismissed. The gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack. For a moment, the courtroom exploded with noise. A wave of murmurs spread through the gallery. A few of my colleagues stood up. I heard someone say, "Finally, justice." Olivia grabbed my hand and squeezed it tightly. I turned toward my parents. My father had buried his face in his hands. My mother was staring at the judge in stunned disbelief. But Judge Whitaker wasn't finished. Furthermore, he said, raising his voice above the noise, the court orders Mr. and Mrs. Schultz to pay Ms. Schultz's legal fees in the amount of $72,000 for filing a frivolous lawsuit. The courtroom fell silent again. I want to be clear about the reasoning behind this sanction, the judge continued sternly. This lawsuit was brought with insufficient evidence. Edited messages were presented that misrepresented the facts, and Mrs. Schultz's conduct in this courtroom has been contemptuous. My mother flinched. This court will not tolerate baseless accusations against an individual whose reputation has already been harmed by this litigation and the surrounding media coverage. Ms. Schultz deserves compensation for that damage. He then looked directly at my parents. In addition, this court issues a formal order prohibiting Victor and Bonnie Schultz from contacting Ms. Schultz in any way, by phone, email, text message, social media, or in person. Any violation of this order will result in contempt charges and a restraining order. My father's face had gone pale. Do you understand? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, my father said quietly. My mother said nothing. She stared down at her hands. Caldwell stood. Your Honor, my clients would like to— Your clients have said enough, the judge interrupted sharply. This case is closed. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down one final time. People began leaving the courtroom. Reporters rushed toward the doors, already typing updates into their phones. My colleagues approached me to congratulate me, shaking my hand, patting my shoulder. But I couldn't move. I simply sat there, feeling the weight of the past few weeks finally lift from my chest. Olivia leaned toward me. You did it, she whispered. It's over. I looked across the room. My parents were gathering their things. My mother's hands were shaking so badly that she dropped her purse. My father silently picked it up for her while Caldwell spoke to them in low, urgent tones, probably explaining what had just happened. Neither of them looked at me. Not once. And somehow that felt like the real victory. When I stepped into the courthouse hallway, I saw her. My mother was standing alone near the elevator. My father and Caldwell had already walked ahead. She was just standing there staring at the wall. For a moment I considered walking past her, ignoring her the way she had ignored me for most of my life. But something made me stop. "Mom," I said. She turned toward me. Her face was blotchy from crying, and her carefully applied makeup had smeared. She looked older than I had ever seen her. "What?" she asked. "I'm sorry it came to this," I said, and I meant it. Not because I regretted fighting for what was mine, but because I hated that our family had ended up in a courtroom. She let out a bitter laugh. "You're sorry?" she said. "You just took everything from us." "I didn't take anything," I replied quietly. "Grandfather gave it to me. That's the difference." "You think you've won?" she said, stepping closer. "You think this is over? You've lost your family, Marina. You have no one now." I studied her face carefully, and suddenly I understood something. She truly believed that family meant blood, obligation, and control. "I never had a family," I said calmly. "I had people who wanted grandfather's money. That's not the same thing." "We're still your parents," she said, though her voice wavered. "No," I replied. "You're the people who gave birth to me, but you were never my parents. Parents show up, parents support you, parents love you, even when you disappoint them. You never did any of that." For a moment her expression faltered. I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said coldly, "We will never forgive you for this." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I said. "I'm asking you to leave me alone." Then I walked away. I didn't look back. That was the last conversation we ever had. The next morning I met Olivia at her office. "I want to make sure they can't come back," I told her. "I want this finished." She nodded. "The judge's order already prohibits contact, but we can also file for a formal restraining order if you want additional protection." "Do it," I said. She began filling out paperwork. "We'll also finalize the estate transfer," she added. "All assets will be properly transferred and accounts reopened under your name. They won't be able to challenge anything again." "How long will it take?" "A few weeks, maybe a month." And then she looked at me carefully. "How are you holding up, honestly?" I thought about it. "I feel relieved," I said slowly. "But also sad. Does that make sense?" "Completely," she said. "You won, Marina, but winning doesn't always feel the way we expect." Over the next few days, I focused on protecting my peace. I changed my phone number, blocked my parents on every social platform. I informed building security that they were never to be allowed into my apartment building. I wasn't hiding. I was setting boundaries. Olivia filed the restraining order. It was granted without opposition. My parents didn't even show up to the hearing. A few days later, the managing partner at Kirkland & Ellis called me into his office. I expected a lecture about the media attention. Instead, he said, "I'm proud of you. You handled that situation with more grace than most people would." "Thank you," I replied. "If you need time off, take it," he offered. I shook my head. "I'd rather work," I said. "I need the normal routine." He smiled. "That's exactly what I expected you to say." That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, my quiet, peaceful apartment, and realized something important. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for my parents' approval. I wasn't hoping they would finally recognize my worth. I was free. The media reaction came quickly, and it was overwhelming. By the next morning, articles about the trial were everywhere, and the headlines had completely changed. Attorney wins inheritance battle against greedy parents. Grandfather's video testimony reveals family truth. Judge orders parents to pay legal fees after baseless lawsuit. One article in the Chicago Tribune stood out. It was detailed and thoughtful. The reporter had clearly done their homework. They interviewed people who had been inside the courtroom and described my mother's outburst and my grandfather's video. They even tracked down my law school professors, former colleagues, and a few of my grandfather's neighbors. Every one of them told the same story. They described me as hardworking, principled, and deeply devoted to my grandfather. My parents, not so much. The comment sections looked very different this time. Instead of calling me greedy, people were supportive. Good for her. Family doesn't mean you have to accept abuse. That video made me cry. Her grandfather truly loved her. I hope she uses the money to build the life she deserves. My phone started buzzing constantly. Colleagues from the firm sent congratulations. Former classmates reached out. Even people I hadn't spoken to in years sent messages of support. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Sarah, someone I had never met. I saw your story on the news. I'm going through something similar with my own family. Watching you stand up for yourself gave me the courage to set boundaries with my parents. Thank you for being brave enough to fight. I read that message 3 times. Later that day, Olivia forwarded me an email from a journalist asking if I would agree to an interview. You could tell your side of the story, she said. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to shout the truth from the rooftops about everything my parents had done. But another part of me, the part that had finally found peace, knew I didn't need to. No, I told Olivia. The court record says everything that needs to be said. I'm done explaining myself. I never actively searched for news about my parents after the trial, but information reached me anyway. A colleague mentioned that my father's real estate company had lost 2 major clients. Both cited concerns about character in their termination letters. In Chicago's business world, reputation mattered, and the trial had damaged his. My mother's social circle began to distance themselves as well. The same women she had spent decades trying to impress started avoiding her. One of my grandfather's old neighbors told me she had seen my mother at a charity gala, standing alone near the bar while her former friends gathered across the room. It was sad, the neighbor said. But honestly, Marina, people are talking. What she said about you in court, that was cruel. No one wants to be associated with that. Hearing that didn't make me happy. It didn't even feel like revenge. Mostly, it just felt empty. A few weeks later, I ran into an old family friend at a coffee shop. She had known my parents for more than 30 years. I'm sorry about everything that happened, she said carefully. Your grandfather was a good man. He made the right decision. Thank you, I replied. She hesitated before adding, Your parents are struggling, financially and socially. I heard they might sell the house. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want to know. I hope they find peace, I said, and I meant it. Not because I forgave them, but because I no longer wanted to carry their bitterness with me. She looked surprised. That's very generous of you. It's not generosity, I said softly. It's self-preservation. Hating them would hurt me more than it would hurt them. She nodded slowly. Your grandfather would be proud of the woman you've become. That made me smile. Because unlike my parents' approval, his had always mattered. 3 months after the trial, I made an important decision about the inheritance. I didn't need $18.5 million. I had a stable career and a comfortable life already. The money was far more than I could ever spend on myself, but I knew exactly what my grandfather would have wanted me to do with it. I scheduled a meeting with my financial advisor and Olivia. I want to create a scholarship fund, I told them, for law students from low-income backgrounds. Olivia smiled immediately. Your grandfather would love that. I want to call it the Edward Schultz Scholarship Fund, I continued. I'm endowing it with $3 million. That should provide full tuition scholarships for at least 4 students every year. My advisor nodded. That's extremely generous. It's what he would have done, I said. We partnered with the University of Chicago Law School, my grandfather's alma mater, to establish the program. The first scholarships would be awarded the following fall. I personally wrote the selection criteria. Students who had overcome real hardship. Students who worked multiple jobs, students who understood what it meant to fight for an education, students like I had once been. I also bought a house. Nothing extravagant, just a small Victorian in a quiet neighborhood not far from the firm. It had a garden, a front porch, and enough space for the kind of life I wanted to build. The rest of the inheritance I invested conservatively. I didn't want to live extravagantly. I didn't want people to treat me differently because of my grandfather's money. I wanted to honor his memory by living the way he had taught me, with integrity, generosity, and purpose. The day the scholarship fund was announced, the university sent me an email. They had already received 50 applications, and the deadline was still 2 months away. One application included a short note. My family always told me I would never make it to law school. This scholarship makes me believe that maybe I can. When I read that message, I cried. Because that was exactly what my grandfather had done for me. He made me believe I could. 6 months after the trial, my life had finally settled into something peaceful. I woke up each morning in my own home, a house paid for with money my grandfather had left me because he loved me. I made coffee in a kitchen filled with morning sunlight. I walked to work through a neighborhood where people smiled and greeted each other, and I never heard from my parents again. The court order was still in place, but I doubted I would ever need it. They had moved on, and so had I. At work, things began to change. The partners treated me with a different kind of respect. Not because of the inheritance, but because I had handled an incredibly public and stressful situation with composure. I started receiving larger cases and greater responsibility. One afternoon, Olivia stopped by my office door. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Honestly? I'm doing well," I said. And this time, I truly meant it. "I don't think about them anymore, not the way I used to." She nodded. "That's growth." "I've realized something," I added. "Family isn't always defined by blood. It's the people who actually show up for you. The people who recognize your value, even when you're struggling to see it yourself." Olivia smiled. "Your grandfather understood that." My weekends started to look different too. I began volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping people who couldn't afford attorneys. I hosted dinners with close friends, real friends, people who appreciated me for who I was. I even started dating someone, a thoughtful and kind professor I met at a charity event. He didn't care about the inheritance. What he cared about was that I laughed at his terrible jokes and that I was passionate about my work. One evening, sitting on my porch with a glass of wine, I had a quiet realization. I was happy. Truly, deeply happy. Not because I had won in court. Not because of the money, but because I was finally free to be myself. In that quiet moment on my porch, I finally understood something my grandfather had been trying to teach me for years. Happiness doesn't come from proving people wrong. It comes from finally realizing you never needed their approval in the first place. For a long time, I believed that if I worked harder, achieved more, or sacrificed enough, my parents would eventually see my worth. But love that has to be earned through suffering isn't love, it's control. What my grandfather gave me was more than an inheritance. He gave me clarity. He showed me that real family is not defined by obligation or bloodlines, but by presence. By the people who stand beside you when it's inconvenient, who celebrate your victories without jealousy, and who believe in you even when you doubt yourself. Winning in court didn't make me whole. Letting go of the need to be accepted by people who never truly valued me, that's what changed everything. So if there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop chasing their approval and start building a life where you no longer need it. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up for yourself, set boundaries with people who were supposed to support you, or fight for your dignity, then I hope my experience reminds you that you're not alone. Stories like this travel much farther than we imagine, because so many people quietly face the same struggles. If something in this story spoke to you, please take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Sometimes one story can give another person the courage to protect their own peace. I'd also truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to family or walk away from a relationship that was hurting you? How did you handle it? I read every single one. And if you want to hear more real stories about courage, justice, and people reclaiming story, thank you for being here, for listening, and for being part of this community.